Well, good evening. Thank you for joining me at the 8 o'clock hour on a Monday night for Last Days Live. Last week we began a new schedule, as it were, and we were doing this on Fridays, but I decided to sandwich all my my live stuff into one day. Well, actually 2 days, because I do Sunday, obviously, I preach a sermon and teach a Bible class. And then on Monday morning, we do Monday Morning Live, which is kind of silly. And then tonight, on Monday nights, we do Last Days Live, and it's not silly at all. Got a lot of stuff to cover tonight. Thank you for being with me. I pray that what we have to cover will impact you and your family to recognize that we're living in the last days. And it's time for us to man up, woman up. It's time for us to put our Christianity where our promise is. Remember that promise you made when you were baptized many years ago? Remember saying to the Lord that you could have me fully? Remember saying that you agreed to the Romans 12, 1 and 2, that you would die to yourself and that you become a living sacrifice? Well, you know, that wasn't just for the good times. It wasn't just for the moments when, everything was going well as far as Christianity is concerned. It also has to do with times when we're under persecution, and we be there. And so, as we deal with this topic of Last Days Live, I hope that you'll approach it from a sober-minded standpoint, because I am very, very convinced that one of two things is going to happen in my lifetime. I think that either the Lord is going to come back, or we're going to see a horrible level of judgment come down upon this nation. I think that the only thing that can stem either of those two is if there will be a great revival. I think that we could see that. I think that it is possible. There have been revivals in the past, and I believe the Lord pays attention to that. And as we'll see here in just a few moments, with some of the passages that we've been talking about, as we can predict when the cycle of judgment is upon us, I think that it's pretty clear that God is willing to respond, withhold, because remember, He doesn't want anyone to perish. He wants everyone to come to repentance. It's the reason I'm convinced that we've not seen Him send the Jesus back or to bring great judgment upon America, for that matter. I think that He is waiting, hoping that there will be great repentance. I know that our president is not the most moral man. He certainly doesn't have the most moral mouth or past. But I really believe that he is like a Nebuchadnezzar. I believe that God is using him. And I believe that I'm confident we need to be praying for him, as is commanded in the book of Romans. And we need to be supportive of some of the things that he is doing, especially when it has to do with us and has to do with what's going on in our lifetime. I clicked the wrong screen. I was clicking you up here, and I had to click this one over here. It's happening right before our eyes, folks. I mean, it's coming, and tonight we're going to have a vivid illustration of that, I think. Tonight I'm going to suggest to you, as I did last week, that there are two things that God looks for as we're in this cycle of judgment. And I'm going to show you an illustration for both of these, and I think that you'll be able to conclude that the Lord's return is imminent. And if it's not the Lord's return, it's judgment upon this nation is imminent. And I think that you can, if God is a consistent God, and He most certainly is, then I think that you can bank on that. It's happening right before our eyes. First segment is current events, as you know, and in this first segment, I want to take you to something that's taking place in Illinois. Now, before I go too far with this, I need you to understand I spent 10 years of my life in Illinois. I love Illinois. I love the people of Illinois. I'm so thankful for the history that I have with the folks of Illinois. My first son was born in Illinois, so I've got a lot of history with Illinois, okay? So as I say this, and I'm very critical, understand that I'm coming at this from an individual who has lived there, understands that all the money runs north from Springfield, and understands that all the power runs north from Springfield towards Chicago. I get all of that. But recently, I'm told that some legislation has come down from the governor there, and he signed a bill into law requiring public schools in the state to include LGBT history in their curriculums. That's lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender. The legislation, according to the Blaze, which I appreciate a lot of the conservative stuff that comes out of the Blaze, but according to the Blaze, it says the legislation mandates that in public schools only, the teaching of history shall include a study of the roles and contributions of lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people in the history of this country and this state. It goes into effect July of next year. One of the bill's co-sponsors, State Senator Heather Steens, a Democrat, said after its passage in May that it is my hope that teaching students about the valuable contributions of LGBT, and this particular person included the Q for queer, individuals have made throughout history will create a safer environment with fewer incidents of harassment. Now let me be clear right up front. I am one who feels that we need to be loving, we need to be caring. There were homosexuals in the New Testament who came to the Lord. We know that Paul speaks of that to the Corinthians, and how that we need to celebrate the fact that a changed lifestyle is a changed lifestyle. And you've got skeletons in your closet just as I do. But it's also important for us to recognize the impact that this movement is having upon our nation. I find it interesting that the Steens person, Heather Steens, that she would mention the harassment that's taking place towards them. There has been a great deal of harassment that has been ongoing with regards to the gay community and others. I don't deny that. But I would also ask you to consider the type of harassment now that homosexual marriage has been legitimized by our Supreme Court. And by the way, I think that that's probably the nail in the coffin as far as God is concerned with regards to whether or not he's going to bless this nation. But now that it's been legitimized by our Supreme Court, we're finding that they're not only coming out of the closets, as it were, but there is a level of harassment that's being taken place from the other side. And this is just one illustration of that, I believe. That our children are being forced in public schools, at least in Illinois, and believe me, it's coming to your state soon, but they're being forced now to not only to listen to, but they would be accused of being bigots and having the wrong perspective on history if they were to challenge any of these kind of teachings. And I find it to be something that not only you and I should be concerned about, but I find it to be something that you and I need to recognize. We are, in some respect, promoting it when we send, we pay for it at times as far as some of the fees and the taxes and we pay to send our children off to institutions that are trying to indoctrinate them in the joys and the upside of the homosexual lifestyle. Remember, it was largely this homosexual lifestyle that got Sodom and Gomorrah blown off the map. I'm just concerned that we're not recognizing as parents that when you send your child for 50% of their life, 50% of their waking hours, I should say, when you send them off into a vacuum where their mentors are not allowed to pray with them, their mentors are not allowed to talk to, read the Bible to them, their mentors are not allowed to openly condemn homosexuality, transgenderism, all of those kind of things. When we send our children off into that vacuum of morality, we're finding that they are trying to put together the pieces. And they're understanding through our silence that evidently it's okay. Evidently it's not too bad because the teacher doesn't bring it up. My mentor, my coach doesn't talk about it. And so via our silence in the public school system, we are validating this kind of a lifestyle. You can argue all day long if you want to. Now, you can argue that, in my school, we don't press this, we don't press that. But my question is, in your school, if it's a public school, my question is, are you as a teacher allowed to pray with your students? Are you allowed to read them the Bible? Are you allowed to discuss openly the perversion of homosexuality? Then you're sending them away into a vacuum where you're not allowed to actually address these topics. I appreciate, if you're a teacher, God bless you. I appreciate the mission field that you're in. I appreciate all the good things that you do. These sweet children who don't have parents at home they're taking care of. Many of you spend a lot of your money to feed them. Some of you spend your money to clothe them. You love them. In some ways, you're the only parents they have. But think about it. You're a parent that has been muzzled by the state with regards to the most important things that little child will ever learn. I'm all about humanitarianism, but we need to make sure that we understand the difference between humanitarianism and evangelism. You are assigned as a Christian. Your marching orders, Matthew 28, Mark 16, your marching orders are to go to make disciples, teach them everything that Jesus had taught. Not necessarily to go into a world just to take care of their physical needs. That's a good thing, and I'm not against it. But don't claim to be a missionary in a mission field if you're not evangelistic. If you're just taking care of the physical things, you're not going as far as the Lord wants you to go. And I'm really, really concerned that we are finding that our kids are going into this great vacuum. I hope that you can read that. Maybe if I pull my thing closer, you'll be able to get a better look at it. Is that any better? This was sent, or actually posted by a friend of mine online, and I went, and I don't just take things offline. I investigate them myself as much as possible, and you'll find that there's a line there in the middle that's not really blanked out. It's just in light because it's kind of a distraction. This is very legal jargon. But in 2005, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals found that there is no fundamental right of parents to be the exclusive provider of information regarding sexual matters to their children. This goes on to say, we also hold that parents have no due process or privacy right to override the determinations of public schools as to the information to which their children will be exposed while enrolled as students. This determination, and you can see there at the bottom, that took place in California. This determination has been used and quoted and used throughout the nation to set a precedence with regards to the amount of rights, how far the public school system can go with regards to teaching your child. And essentially it's saying, and I'm not a lawyer, but I think that it's pretty obvious, you read it for yourself again. Essentially it's saying that if you choose to enroll your child in a public school system, and by the way, you don't have to do that. You can, thank God, we still have the rights in America today to teach your own kids. I don't know how long that's going to last, but for the moment, you do not have to enroll your child in public schools. But if you choose, and it is your choice, in other words, you're the one making the conscientious decision, you're going to go that route rather than teach them yourself. If you choose, then you've got to understand what at least this is saying with regards to California, and is being quoted across the nation, and it seems to be becoming the standard by which many schools are being judged. Essentially, parents have no fundamental rights to dictate, to say that their children should not be exposed to that, specifically in the early parts there it says with regards to sexual matters. Parents do not have the due process or privacy right to override determinations of the public school as to the information that their children will be exposed to when they're enrolled as students at that particular school. So if you conscientiously choose to send your child there, you're choosing to submit them to the vacuum. And in that vacuum, they're going to, at the very least, hear the silence as it resonates around the room. Nobody's speaking up against it, so it must be okay. But also you're going to send them into this moral vacuum where it's not always silent. Sometimes it's going to be as perverted as what I just said is going on in Illinois. And so I think that it's very, very important that we as parents recognize not only what's going on, but what we need to do about it. Reclaim the majority of the waking hours of your child. This Dr. James White person, I don't know who it is, but it doesn't really matter because he doesn't have to necessarily add any credibility to this particular quote. I just thought it was really accurate as far as news is concerned. I think that you're going to see the California curriculum, whatever he said in between, ... What goes in California doesn't stay in California. You know that that's true. With regards to the Hollywood scenario and all of that kind of thing, they're trendsetters out there on the West Coast. And so largely what they do and how they live and all, it's going to eventually trickle down. It's going to eventually affect the rest of the country. But I like the way that he says this. He says that what goes in California doesn't stay in California. That's the problem. It affects the entire left coast, then the entire right coast. Then it starts to percolate, or percolating down, into the middle. It will be in Austin, Texas, and pretty soon it will be all over the place. So true, so true. And we've seen it with all kinds of things. Go all the way back to the hippie movement, you see all the rebellion against the Vietnam War and all of those kind of things, and the liberals, and what they did and how it began to affect the entire country. Think about women's rights and how the women are no longer really asking for them to have an equal level of base with regards to rights within the employment. It's that they're now wanting superior things. Now you can't speak out against them. You can't talk about them. They want to be superior. Think about abortion and how that it slowly seeped in. Now think about homosexuality. all we got to do is give it a foothold. You remember the old adage, or it's not an adage, what do you call that thing? Old proverb or whatever about the camel. You remember? The camel says in the middle of the cold night, Master, can I just stick my nose under the tent? Sure. Can I stick my hoof under the tent? Sure. How about my front leg? Sure. And by the morning, the camel had got its entire body in the tent, pushing the master outside. That's the way it is. And that's the way it's happening in our nation. Just little by little. This is a demonic plot. And Satan is willing to wait. He takes just small incremental steps. And what we see happening here, if it happens in California, just give it time. It's going to happen in Austin, Texas, and it's going to happen in Little Rock, Arkansas, and it's going to happen in Paragould, Arkansas, where I live. Just give it time. We've seen it. It's history. But so many of us are blind to history. We do not look over our shoulder and learn from the past. And that is the real tragedy, is it not? I was studying in my, forgive me, I got a thing going on. I was studying for my Sunday evening lesson from 1 Timothy chapter 4. I preached out of it this past Sunday. And I was just looking in my study Bible, and I was noticing the notes below 1 Timothy chapter 4, verses 1 and 2. This passage talks about a great falling away, that many will fall from the faith. And this is the commentary or the notes, whatever you want. Again, this is not inspired, I get that, but you see the numerous biblical references that are there, and I think that you'll find that if you look them up, that this is an accurate statement. I'm looking at the number 2. It says, many believers will fall away from the faith because they will fail to love the truth. Don't believe that? Read 2 Thessalonians 2 and 10. They also resist the sinful trends of the last days. Don't believe that? Read Matthew 25 and 2 Timothy 3. I'd also give you 2 Peter chapter 3. But then there's this sentence. Thus, the distorted gospel of compromising ministers and educators will find little resistance, if any, in the church. That really hit me between the eyes, because there's two groups of people, and both of them, by the way, I think are working in the greatest mission field that we have in America today, ministers and educators. But it really hit me between the eyes, because what he is saying is that my profession, and many of you out there who are teachers, is being compromised by the worldly trends. I'm not at all suggesting that as a minister I shouldn't get back in the pulpit. And I'm not at all suggesting that as an educator you shouldn't get back in the classroom. But what I am suggesting is this. We've got to remember why we are there. And if we remember why we were there, why we are there, we're going to find ourselves in a heap of trouble. Yeah. We're going to find ourselves talking about things that folks don't want to hear from the pulpit. We're going to find ourselves talking about things in the classroom that could potentially get us fired. But you know, folks, these are the last days. If ever there was a time for you and I to stand up and to put the Lord first, it's now. You know, some of your Christian ancestors were fed to the lions because they refused to keep their mouths shut. It's time for some of us as ministers and educators to stand up. It's time for us to say the things that we're not supposed to say, because we always treasure and always put God's will first, always. Don't allow this particular commentary to become true in your life. Don't be, let's pick on first in my profession, don't be a sissy preacher. Don't be a preacher who just gets in the pulpit and always pats them on the back expecting high fives as they rush out the auditorium on their way to lunch. Be the preacher like Jeremiah, like John the Baptist, like Jesus himself. Be a preacher who is willing to speak the truth. And may I go further, as I said this morning in my Monday morning live, may I say this. I'm convinced that we have also, as preachers, have got to go to the point that we are not just saying the truth, we are being persistent in saying the truth. Because I believe it is our job, like Jeremiah, like John the Baptist, like Jesus, to press the truth until something changes. They will either dismiss you, most of them will, or they'll submit to whatever the truth is. It got John the Baptist's head cut off. It got Jesus hung on a cross. And so it's probably going to be the same to you as a minister, but that doesn't change the pattern of Jesus Christ. Jesus he wasn't about endearing people to himself. He was about drawing people to himself for salvation. And in that process, there were times he made a lot of folks mad because he was just persistent about his job. Educators. It's not just ministers, but it's also educators. Educators, it's time for you to step up. I think there's two things that you've got to be doing during these last days if you want to legitimize your Christianity in the public forum. Number one, you've got to be willing to say stuff that could get you fired. And number two, you've got to be willing to train parents to do their own job of educating their children. Because that's the pattern, the consistent pattern of the New Testament. Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 4 through 9. Luke chapter 2, verses 51 through 52. Ephesians chapter 6 and verse 4. Titus chapter 2 and verse 5. Read them all. This is the consistent pattern throughout history that parents are to be the educators of their children. And so, teachers, you need to do two things. You need to start saying stuff that can get you fired. Not just necessarily to make trouble, but because it's time for somebody to be vocal. And number two, you need to be an individual as a teacher who's teaching parents to do their own job. Only in that do I see a teacher who is legitimately being evangelistic. Application for Christians, you're not going to like this one, but I believe it with all of my heart. It's really gotten me in trouble recently. There is no godly logic in sending our children away from their parents for 50% of their waking hours. A good friend of mine pointed this out to me just recently, that in public schools, children are to, in most states, it's mandated that they are to be in school 180 days. You know how many days that leaves? 185. So that means approximately half of a child's waking hours, when you figure in coaching, basketball, all that goes with, when you figure, about half of a child's waking hours are spent away from mom and dad. I'm not sure that you can find any spiritual logic in that. I'm not sure when you understand the passages that I just enumerated that you can find any legitimacy in that. I recently challenged some folks online. They didn't like it. I didn't get any responses really to amount to anything. But here's my challenge for you. I just gave you, 5 or 6 passages that say parents should teach. You find me 2 or 3 that show me that God is pleased with us sending them off to public education. Okay, just show me one. One passage that says God is pleased with parents surrendering 50% of their child's life to public education. Show me one passage and we'll talk. By way of an announcement, along this same line, this coming weekend I'm going to be blessed to travel to Duggar, Indiana. I haven't been there in years. A lot of good folks up there, and just across the border from Illinois, where I hope that some of my Illinois friends will come over and see me. Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. I speak on Saturday and Sunday, and my topic is parenting the Shema. The Shema is essentially Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 4 through 9. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul. That one. Teach it to your children when you wake up, when you're walking along the path. That one. That passage is called the Shema. It's the daily prayer. In fact, it's prayed in the morning and it's prayed in the evening by the dedicated, the loyal Jew. It is considered by most to be the most significant prayer of all of Judaism. Jesus himself will validate the Shema, and he will quote it, and he will talk about the significance. In his quotation of it, he tells us that we should love the Lord our God with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength. I believe in those 4 things, he's talking about the entirety of the human experience. The heart, emotions, the soul, the spirit, the eternal insides, the mind, intellect, the strength, the body. I think that what Jesus was saying when he quoted that is that there was a holistic approach to education. There's a holistic approach, Deuteronomy chapter 4, chapter 6, verses 4 through 9, that talks about when you get up, when you lay down, all that. There's a holistic approach to parents taking it upon themselves as a responsibility to teach their own children. After all, God doesn't give children to coaches. He doesn't give children to public school teachers. He doesn't give children to babysitters. He gives children to parents. Now, we as parents sometimes will substitute parent, will pass them off to those individuals, but parents are given children for a reason. If you got kids, God assumes you're going to take care of your kids. But giving them away for almost 50% of their waking hours doesn't make a lot of spiritual sense. And it certainly does not honor the Shema, Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 4 through 9. Back to my announcement. I hope that some of you could come and be a part of this coming weekend. As I said, it starts on Friday, goes through Sunday up till about noon. I think it's only $20 a person, good food, fellowship, etc. Beautiful place, the Woodland Bible Camp. And so come and be a part of that. I get to speak those 3 times, and I'm hoping to do all 3 of my lessons on the Shema. And if you're paying attention, my Facebook posts are all about the Shema this week as well, or many of them are about the Shema. And so you can get kind of a heads up about that. But anyhow, there you go. All right, moving on. That was the announcement. Biblical warning, got to move. Quickly, went long last week and I'm going along this evening. So let's move on. Biblical warning. We've been talking about predicting the end. This will be my last lesson in this, I guess it's been, a 3-part series? But I suggested to you initially that Scripture is pretty clear about the fact that we cannot know when Jesus is coming back, but we can know the season, and that we are commanded by God to pay attention, be alert, watch. It says that repeatedly. Watch. And so, what am I watching for if I can't know anything? So we can know the signs of the times, and it's important for you and I to be watching them. So in predicting the end, you might recall last time, I told you that I believe that there are 2 things, 2 indicators from my study of Scripture, 2 indicators to suggest when God is going to bring judgment down upon a nation. In one of those judgment cycles, Jesus is coming back. I can't tell you when it is, but in one of those judgment cycles, so as you predict the judgment cycle, you can predict the likelihood that Jesus might be as part of this process. There are 2 things that he does. Number 1, he will look at the ratio of the godly to the ungodly. And then number 2, he'll look at the ratio of civility to cruelty. It's the consistent pattern of God throughout. I gave you 2 illustrations. One was Noah and the other was Abraham, more specifically Lot. But in those illustrations, we were able to see these 2 principles play out. There's other illustrations I could give you, but that's enough for the moment. I told you last time that I was going to combine these 2. But let's again show you what we saw last week. Here's the Noah one. All right, and notice that in both of these underlying things and in the circle that I got there, you've got the ratio of the godly to ungodly. Notice every inclination of the hearts of the human heart was evil all the time before the flood. Okay, you got that? So you got a horrible ratio. We only got 8 folks who are righteous. Horrible ratio of godly to the ungodly. Then you got this ratio of civility to cruelty. Full of violence, it says, the earth was full of violence. All the people, you see that circle there. Okay, that was Noah. Then we pedaled forward to Abraham last week, and I showed you that Abraham, we see the same 2 indicators playing out. Remember that God visits Abraham, and the angels are sent down to Sodom, and you might recall that there they're going to visit with Lot. And before they get there, they have this kind of a bargaining moment with Abraham. And Abraham says, if there's 50 people, surely you're not going to wipe out the entire city for 50 people. God says no, and dickers them down all the way down to 10 folks. Was there 10? No. We only got 4 folks to leave the city, and 3 of them are the only ones that make it to the cave. But anyhow, so you see the ratio of godly to ungodly has gotten so bad that we only get 4 folks, actually righteous folks, who leave the city. Secondarily, the ratio of cruelty or civility to cruelty. You remember the angels, the men gather from every part of the city. You see the ratio there. Every part of the city, you got these perverted guys, and they're trying to drag the angels out because they want to have sex with them. And in that scenario, you might remember Lot actually volunteers his daughters. What kind of dad does that? No wonder he's going to have problems when he gets to the cave. No wonder he has problems. He raised his children in that particular setting. I mean, come on, daddies. Brain up. Man up. Think about it. If you're sending your child into that kind of setting, it's going to affect them. Don't be surprised when they come home with perverted views. But anyhow, back to Lot. You might recall that we got the ratio of civility to cruelty. It's pretty obvious here because the folks surround the house. They're beating the door down. They're so violent, wanting to bring those angels out into the street, have sex with them. It's a perverted place. But is it any more perverted than what we're seeing in America today? I told you that this was the passage I wanted to get to last week, but I forgot to put it in my slides, and so we'll conclude this series with this one tonight. Notice in Luke, that was the Old Testament descriptions, but now we move to the New Testament, okay? And in Luke, we've got this description that includes both of those two characters from which we've gained these 2 criteria. We're going to talk about Noah, and we're going to talk about Abraham, specifically Lot, but in Abraham's period. Just as it was in the days of Noah, that's our first dude, just as it was in the days of Noah, so also it will be in the day of the Son of Man. People were eating, drinking, marrying, and being given away into marriage in the day Noah entered the ark, then the flood came and destroyed them all. So just like it was in Noah's day, we already discovered what it was like in Noah's day. Every inclination of the heart was bad. They were violent. Everybody in the world was violent, and so you got both those indicators happening. Okay, how about Abraham? Verse 28. It was the same in the days of Lot. That's, of course, the days of Abraham. Lot's the nephew. People were eating and drinking, buying and selling, planting and building. But the day Lot left Sodom, fire and sulfur rained down from heaven and destroyed them all. Then watch this. It will be just like this on the day the Son of Man is revealed. Just like what was happening during the days of Sodom and during the days pre-flood, he says it's going to be just like that. Those criteria that you see listed at the top are going to be exhausted. God's going to consider them, and he's going to say enough's enough. The ratio of the godly to ungodly is so far out of balance, I'm done. The ratio of civility to cruelty is so far out of balance, I'm done. Is it possible that we're living in an age that's very much a parallel to Noah and Abraham? Well, I give you this. The ratio of godly to ungodly. I'd like to think that we still, in America today, have a great morality about us. I think that it's one of the reasons that, at least in the last election, the conservatives stepped up and they were able to put somebody in the Oval Office who, at least for the moment, is supporting our conservative values. But folks, we are rapidly seeing the ratio tip out of our favor. Especially when we send our children off for 50% of their waking hours into the vacuum of the public school system, where there are no, the teachers, bless their hearts, do not have the backing from their schools to pray openly and to read the Bible openly and to address these perversions with a moral statement from God. When we choose to send our children off into that vacuum, we are doing largely the same thing that parents did back in the day when they put their children into context kind of like Lot. And we found out what happened with regards to Lot. He lost his family. We shake our heads. We wonder, why in the world is 70% of our kids walking away from the church upon graduation from high school? I just can't get it. I don't understand it. Are we brain dead? Think about the influences. 50% of their waking hours were allowing them to be influenced either by the vacuum, the minus any morality, or the peer pressure of individuals who are too young to even know what they're talking about, or mentors who, instead of being silent, are actually speaking out in favor of these kind of perversions. Ratio of godly to the ungodly, there's a picture to illustrate it. How about this one? I had another picture. I was going to put it up. It actually was a man's hand, or a guy's hand, I assume it was a man, and he was holding, it was gloved, one of those rubber gloves, a surgical glove, and he was holding a very, very small infant that had been aborted and basically chopped in half. And it was a bloody picture, and it was pretty gruesome, but it was the results of an abortion. I was going to put that on the screen, and then I got to thinking, because you see, you've got to recognize in these last days that censorship is alive and well. And if I put that up, there's a good chance that YouTube will not allow me to load this later. Censorship is alive and well even in the church. Folks don't want to hear it. A lot of what I am saying about these common sense conclusions about turning your children over for 50% of their waking hours doesn't make any spiritual sense. It's hurting feelings. I'm losing friends. I'm losing support because folks don't want to hear it. Censorship is alive and well, my friends. But that doesn't change the fact it happened to the Lord. It happened to the first century Christians. There were informants back then who got the first century Christians in trouble and fed to the lions, and I'm sure that there are informants today, individuals who are speaking out and eventually will turn us in as far as the law is concerned. But it doesn't change that. We're living in the last days. I've shown you these two things that I believe that God uses with regards to the criteria of bringing judgment. Number one, the ratio of the godly to the ungodly. Folks, it's quickly tipping out of balance. The ratio of civility to cruelty, folks, it's quickly tipping out of balance. And if I had been able to put up the picture that I wanted for you to see, that you would see, and it was one of those that was hard for me to look at. But I know what's going to happen if I put it up there. It's kind of the same thing that will happen if I preach from the pulpit. If I say things from the pulpit, you know what they do? They fire the preacher. They send him down the road. We're living in tough times. I'm willing to speak the tough message. I need you, please. I need you to support me in this. Please pray for me. Please pray for my heart that I'll be humble. Please pray for my family that they'll be able to endure. Please pray for my ministry, that financially we can have what we need in order to continue to produce these kind of messages. Because folks, if these are the last days, it's time for us to wake up and journey out of complacency. It's time for church leaders to understand, if they're going to be true shepherds of the flock, they're going to have to say some things that are tough. They're going to have to make some decisions that are tough. They're going to have to be able to back individuals such as myself when it's tough. Here's my address that I did not get up last week, but I would ask you to go there. YouTube.com/user/Sonny Childs, all squished together. If you go there, you can look at the various lessons that I have up. We try to put up all the Sunday Lord's Day Live things, and this will be up there eventually, God willing, but other material. And please go there and like my channel and do what you can to promote it. Please continue to support this ministry. We desperately need you. What about survival tips? I know, for many out there, I'm an alarmist. They just don't see it coming. They just don't see, it looks like a nice day to me. I just don't see the storm. I suspect that Noah got the same treatment. But it wasn't until that first raindrop that he felt totally vindicated. I don't want raindrops to start falling before my friends and family that are watching this understand the need for us to make some radical changes. These are radically difficult times. And it's going to take radical decisions on our part in order for us to survive this. I don't know when the Lord's coming. I don't know how long He's going to let me have to survive down here. And so it's important for me to think about this. I've been trying to stay with the whole idea of the electronic grid going down, but I'm going to depart from that just a little bit. I'm going to show you something here. We keep this on the counter right beside the front door. I've got a rule at my house, and you call me what you want, but my rule at my house is that when I am gone on trips or whatever, Cindy and Gabriel are not allowed to answer the door. And so if you're going to come and visit them, you need to call and let them know that you're coming first. We always have the lock and the deadbolt locked on the door because we recognize the times that we're living in. But we also have this sitting beside the front door. Now there are some weapons in the house, but this is right beside the front door because I was told some time ago that this is pretty effective deterrent for somebody who's trying to get through your front door. And you get shot in the face with this, and you're probably going to turn around and go the other direction. I just offer that as a possible tip for survival. I believe that we live in very, very dangerous times. I also believe, Dad, that it's up to you to make sure that your family is as prepared as possible to deal with these difficult times. And so there's a survival tip for you. All right, I think that brings us to our end. Yeah, conclusion. Keep your eyes on the skies because He is coming. Can't wait. Can you? Until He does, keep your family close. And I think that includes recognizing that sending them away for 50% of their waking hours, probably not the smartest thing you could do. Gathering them together in one spot, our most prized citizens in one spot for the majority of their waking hours each school day, I'm not sure that's the smartest thing to do. Keep your homemaker vigilant. Make sure that she's aware. I got one of the best. I love her. And you need to make sure, husbands, you need to make sure you love on your homemaker because she is doing a job that's not just commanded of her, but she's doing, Titus chapter 2, verse 5, but she's also doing a job that is absolutely essential for your family's survival. not just physically, but most importantly, spiritually. Keep watch on the conditions. That's what we're trying to do on Monday nights at 8 o'clock. And I think you can see. It's happening in Illinois. We know it's been happening in California for a very long time. I don't know what this next 2020 election is going to play out, but I'm telling you, folks, if liberals win, they are not only going to halt the progress we have made as far as securing our opportunity to have freedoms religiously, but they are going to be so upset and mad that they're going to be vindictive. And I think horrible persecution will come down upon us. Keep watch on the conditions. And then lastly and most importantly, remember, teach your children to invest in heaven. And the only way you can do that, Deuteronomy 6 verses 4 through 9. When you get up, when you lay down, when you walk along the way, whatever you're doing, remember, life is a schoolroom. And so we need to dominate life for our children. Everything we do, every part of it. You see, the Jew did not segment life into two parts like we do. You got your secular and you got your religious. That wasn't at all. The Jew had no concept of that. To the Jew, everything was religious. From building up a wall to doing a math equation to saying your prayers, it was all religious because it was a holistic approach to God. And that's what's being commanded in Deuteronomy chapter 6, is what Jesus validates in Mark chapter 12 when he quotes, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul. He's saying the whole being of man should be invested in seeking out God. And the only way to do that is for parents to reclaim the majority, the dominate, the waking hours of their children so that they can be the ones who control when they lay down, when they wake up, when they walk along the way. All of these things are teaching children in life, because life's the schoolroom, teaching children to seek God. Only by doing that can you keep your investments in heaven. I'm convinced. The reason the church is in decline, the reason we're losing our kids as they graduate from high school and go off into the world, the reason our culture is in chaos is because the family is falling apart. There is no common sense in trying to address that issue, the family falling apart, by taking our children and sending them away from their parents for 50% of their waking hours. There's just no common sense in it. He's coming. Can't wait. God bless you. Keep your eyes on the skies. This is Sonny Childs. Be there, Matthew 16:26.